one of my favorite television shows. Yes, Minister. Yes, Prime Minister. In fact, it's such a favorite show of mine that Pat the lawyer and I are actually talking about starting a new podcast about the show. But that aside, there is a humorous interchange between the three characters, Jim Hacker, Humphrey Appleby, and Bernard Woolley, about unforeseen consequences, which with hindsight are foreseeable. Thus, they are foreseeable unforeseen consequences. I like to refer to this as unintended, I'm Ron Burgundy, consequences. And they are becoming more and more prevalent in our society. When it comes to Supreme Court rulings, we see more and more of this. We make a ruling and we've got the decision we want for the social issue or legal issue that we want, but we don't seem to think much about the long-term unintended or unforeseeable consequences, which were foreseeable, therefore they're unintended. I'm Ron Burgundy, consequences. What do I mean? 1954 this week, the landmark decision, widely and continuously hailed as one of the greatest Supreme Court decisions of all time, the Brown versus Board of Education decision was handed down. Now, I don't think you'll seriously find anybody who disagrees with the fact that schools, separate but equal under the Plessy Doctrine, was a bad idea. I don't think you'll seriously find anybody that will argue with that. The problem with the Brown ruling, though, is it is a hodgepodge of pretzelized logic when it comes to how they arrived at the answer that they wanted, which was, of course, desegregation of schools. I actually sat in a discussion this past week about the fact that the logic that the court uses is so convoluted that you can't question it. And that's the problem with the Brown v. Board of Education decision, is you can't even question it. I'm not saying they came to the wrong answer. I'm not saying that schools should have been segregated. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is there probably was a better logic pattern to use to get to that than the one that they ended up actually using, because the one that they actually ended up using, well, it's created problems. Specifically, one of the problems that it created was an intended consequence. You see, the problem with schools under the Plessy Doctrine was there was a great deal of discrimination against African Americans. Students were not permitted into schools, and under the Plessy Doctrine, separate but equal, there was a parallel school system built for African American children, which was, in accordance with the Brown Doctrine, not equal. Separate cannot be equal. And consequently, the fact that the African American community had built and maintained schools was secondary to the consideration that students should be integrated. Now, again, I don't think you're going to find anybody that disagrees with that. Well, was this the right way to do it? And you can't even ask that question, because if you ask that question, you might come to the answer that the court comes up with might not be the correct one. And that is politically unacceptable. You can't say that. You can't even think that, because if you think that, well, you're a racist. No, I'm concerned about intended consequences. I'm Ron Burgundy. Consider this. As a fallout of the Brown v. Board of Education decision, students were, of course, integrated in schools. Now, this, of course, caused a great deal of angst amongst, particularly in the South. It created a lot of animosity. What it also created was a great deal of unemployment. What do I mean? The decision only said that the schools had to be integrated. The students had to be integrated. It did not say the staffs had to be integrated. And so all of those people that were teaching African-American children, all those people that were ancillary staff at schools for African-American children, all those lunch ladies, all those janitors, they all lost their jobs. Many of them did, because the suddenly integrated white schools would not hire them. But nobody thought about that. Nobody considered that. Nobody said, wait, if we write the ruling this way, this is the consequence, instead of passing a law. Now, if you think about those kinds of things, you start realizing that every time there's a Supreme Court decision or ruling or something along those lines, or an overturn, and remember that Brown versus Board of Education was an overturning of stare decisis, was an overturning of a landmark Supreme Court decision called Plessy. Every time there's an overturn, there are unintended, intended consequences. And sometimes I wonder if those unforeseen, unintended consequences were really unintended. What do I mean? Well, let's talk what's going on in the real world right now. Roe v. Wade. I'm not talking about the morality of abortion. We're not on that at all. We're talking about legal issues here. We're talking about constitutional issues here, not morality. I've said this before. I will say it again. I am against abortion, but it's not the issue that I'm going to beat the drum about. It's just not. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change my mind. My position remains the same. If you don't want an abortion, don't get one. It's really that simple. But don't tell me and my wife what we can and can't do. It's none of your business. That's the problem. Which, of course, is what Roe is really all about. If you read the decision, it's less about abortion and more about medical privacy. It's more about the fact that I have a private relationship with my doctor, and that's none of the government's business. There's no compelling government interest to why the government needs to stick its nose into my medical business, which, of course, we talked about last year as a potential consequence when it came to vaccines. And, of course, the whole my body, my choice issue and the hypocrisy behind both sides on that has been rather remarkable. But let's say, for the sake of argument, because it seems logical to assume that it will be, Roe is actually reversed and the issue goes back to the states, as it should have done all along. Let's say that people come to the realization that Roe is bad. It's bad logic. I mean, even Ginsburg felt that way. So let's clean up this mess and go back. Might there be some unintended consequences of that aren't necessarily, he said smilingly, aren't necessarily unintended, i.e. they might be intended. In 2017, there was a woman down in Mississippi who had a miscarriage. I'm not going to describe to you, if you read the articles, they'll describe to you some of the scenes involved, but she had a miscarriage of a viable fetus, and 911 was called. She was taken to the hospital. The corpse was taken for examination. And the state of Mississippi, using a process that is medically questionable, okay? Again, is the science settled or not? I don't know. I know that many people doubt the system that was used to determine that the baby was alive when it was dropped into the toilet and, in essence, murdered. The woman was charged with murder. And as part of the process of the charge with murder, as part of the process for reviewing what happened, at some point, she turned over to them her cellular telephone. Now, again, I don't, would my lawyer allow me to do that? Would Pat's lawyer tell me to do that? Probably not. He'd probably tell me, no, don't do that. But for some reason, she did. And on the cell phone web page was a search for abortion pills. And this was used as the smoking gun to charge her with murder. She intentionally went on the internet, found abortion pills, and took one without medical advice, because you don't take one at that particular point in your pregnancy, and therefore she's guilty of murder. Now, again, I'm not talking about the morality of the situation. I'm not talking about whether or not she intended to murder a baby. It's not the issue to me. The issue is, do I really want the government at any level going through my phone or my internet searches? Do you? There are things on my phone, web, there are things on my computer that I have searched that many people, without context, would be shocked by. Why is Dave looking at this? Well, I mean, if you want me to answer the question, I'll be happy to answer it for you if you ever got into my phone. And I can show you the reasons why I was. But without context, you might look at it and go, oh my God. He's a pervert, racist, misogynist, sexist, terrorist, fill in the blank. Whatever you want to do. Without context, those things are there. I don't know the context of her search for these abortion pills. When did she do it? Did she search for them that day? Did she search for them 6 months before? Who knows? I don't know. I know that charges were ultimately dropped because at some point a prosecutor finally looked at this and went, boys, this is dumb. We ain't doing it. But in the meantime, her life had been disrupted in multiple ways. Number one, with a miscarriage, and number two, which by the way is a tragic thing. I haven't talked about this much, but I went through that once, and I realized it was harder on her than me, but it still was not an easy thing to do. It's a tragic thing, and it disrupts your life. It disrupts your world. It disrupts your plans and your hopes and your dreams. And then to be charged with murder over it because of something that you searched for on your cell phone at some point is kind of rubbing salt into it. There are things that I have searched for that, like I said, with Cammie the other day, this is a true story. Cammie had to get a new phone. Her phone died. And so we had to scramble to get her new phone. And one of the things that the company that we're with does now, and they didn't used to do this, but now they do this, is they send a person to your home with a new phone. They don't just overnight it to you or whatever. There's a guy who shows up on our door about 7:15 at night with the phone, and he walks her through getting it set up. Now, see, to me, this drives me nuts because for me, setting up a new electronic device it's part of the joy of the device, but not for her. And she won't let me do it because, I'm so anal retentive about the stuff that it bothers her. So anyway, this guy's setting up the phone, and he gets to the point where he says to her, so I need to get your fingerprint to set up your fingerprint access. And she looks at me. I'm sitting on the couch drinking coffee. And she says, well, my husband says not to do that. And he looked at me and said, oh? I said, yeah, they don't need a warrant to get your fingerprint, but they need a warrant to get your PIN to get into your phone. And he chuckled a little bit and he says, well, I don't have anything to hide. I said, neither do I. That's not the point. The point is, without probable cause, why would I allow the government to go through my phone at all? Let alone, I don't want them seeing my pictures of my son. I don't want them seeing, what websites I've visited, or, some of those websites might be considered right wing, and they might try to label me or cancel me or whatever. I don't want the government going through it. It's not the point that I don't have anything to hide. And so I said to him, well, let me see your phone. He didn't want to do that. Why not? You don't have anything to hide. You might say to yourself, well, Dave, what does that have to do with Roe v. Wade being overturned? Well, we already know that one woman was, in fact, charged in Mississippi, which, of course, is one of the states that is involved in this Dobbs decision to ban abortion. How are they going to enforce that? He said questioningly. Now, you might say to yourself, Dave, it's not that way. I mean, there are laws. The government cannot search your phone without a warrant, right? They can't go into your phone without a warrant, which is technically true. I mean, they can, but they shouldn't. The problem is that there are no laws on the books that says the government cannot buy that same information from an information broker to whom you or I willingly gave that information. It's already happening. ICE, Immigration Control Enforcement, is buying data from cell phone brokers to bypass specific restrictions on surveillance. Follow me here. The government is buying with your tax dollars the information that it cannot obtain without a warrant from the people to whom you already gave it to. Now, regardless of where you stand on abortion, that's not the issue. Is that the restricted government that we want? The reality is that no matter how you look at it, if you were to have an abortion, and if the right people were to look at the right data on your cell phone, they would be able to determine from your cell phone data whether or not you had an abortion, or they could do so. I'm hesitant to say they can absolutely, because they may not be able to, but as a general rule, they might be able to do so just from the data on your cell phone. What if you used your cell phone to search for abortion clinic? Well, that's pretty obvious. And they bought that data. What if you used your cell phone to search for Plan B or Plan C pills, which I didn't even know existed until this morning? What if you have a government at any level whose entire intention is to end all abortions, all of them, regardless of conditions or anything else? They want to end all abortions. And they have the ability to purchase this information and pursue those people that they feel have violated their outright ban on abortion. Now, you say to me, well, that's an unintended consequence of overturning Roe. Is it? Is it an unintended consequence of overturning Roe, or is it an intended, I'm Ron Burgundy, consequence of overturning Roe? Now, not every state's going to do this, obviously, but if we throw it back to the states, which is what an overturn of Roe would do, how do we decide which states are legally buying data from cell phone companies when the federal government's doing it? And by the way, if you think ICE is the only government agency doing this, you're crazy. Or should we have a UFO hearing and look at shiny stuff? No, I mean, should we have some sort of restriction on this nationwide? Going back to the concept that Roe is really about privacy, and the government, there are no laws saying the government can't buy this information from people to whom we are willingly giving it. Yeah, see, that's key. No warrant needed. You gave it to them. We bought it. And now we're going to use it against you. Sort of seems to defeat the whole purpose of the thing, doesn't it? Why even have a constitution at that point? Justice Brennan once said, if the right to privacy means anything, it is the right of the individual, married or single, to be free from unwarranted government intrusion. James T. Kirk, captain of the USS Enterprise, once said to his second in command at the time, a guy by the name of Commander Decker, how do you define unwarranted? Later, they would learn how he defined unwarranted. But for the moment, how does Justice Brennan define unwarranted? What does it mean that something is unwarranted? We're not saying that it doesn't have a warrant presented upon probable cause. We're saying, why does the government need this information in the first place? Why is the government buying cell phone data? Why would the government buy cell phone data to try to figure out who got an abortion? Other than they want to stop all abortions. I have a problem with that. I really do. I'm sorry. I'm pro-life, anti-abortion, but I'm not going to tell someone else what to do and what not to do. I believe that if you believe that the power of government, any government, can and indeed should be used to force someone to behave the way you want them to behave, you're the tyrant. And I don't care if you're talking about abortion, pronouns, taxes, whatever. If you believe that the power of government should be used to force me to behave the way you want me to behave, or if I want to use it to force you to behave the way I want to behave, that's the tyrants. That's the tyranny. And if you believe that collection of data by the government without a warrant is acceptable, in other words, it's okay for them to spend your tax dollars to buy this data because we gave it to someone else, well, just want you to think about this. if you believe that that's okay, and then using that data to prosecute people for having an abortion, then you have achieved your unintended, I'm Ron Burgundy, consequence of actually overturning Roe.